Thank you all so much for joining us. Today we are going to cover a handful of topics in this exploration of how we get our school meal programs up and running for this school year. Steve is putting out some fires right now, but he is about to join us and will be here at any moment. But thank you for joining us, and let's get started. So to start off by introducing myself, for those of you who know me, hi, it's good to see y'all. Some of the schools we work with are on this session, so wanted to say hello, but my name is Lauren. I work with School Food Solutions. We support school food programs in a handful of states across the country, so we help with the compliance side, we process meal applications, assist with audits, lots of stuff. And there are some other members of my team on today as well. If you ever have any questions, my email is here, and look forward to working with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan. I'm also on the School Food Solutions team. I'm here supporting with our California and our Washington school clients. And I'm also here to help as we try to figure out what reopening looks like. As you can see, my email's at the bottom. Feel free to reach out with questions.
And as I said, Steve is about to join us, but he is with Better For You Meals. They're a vendor that supports, that provides vended meals to various states, Northern California, Southern California, Nevada, Arizona. And I'm sure he'll chime in with more if, oh, he's joining us right now. So I'll let Tess introduce herself and then we'll come back to Steve.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, Tess Bradford, Chief Executive Officer at School Food Solutions. So spent the last few months helping to support emergency feeding operations across multiple states, including California and Nevada, and also leading the emergency feeding effort in New Orleans, Louisiana, working with several different groups to help schools figure out what reopening looks like, and specifically in terms of school food. So happy to join the team today and looking forward to a great town hall.
Steve, you're here. Do you have audio? Uh-oh, you don't have audio. All right, Steve, we'll come back to you. I'm not sure why you don't have audio, but hopefully we can get it going soon. Okay, great. So without wasting any time, these are the topics we're covering today. We are gonna do our best to stick to our schedule and certainly allow for some time at the end to open it up and get some input from y'all, maybe additional questions. But in the meantime, if you're joining us a little late, we have the Q&A at the bottom. We'll be answering those live. And then from there, what we'll be able to do is type in the answers for you, or answer them real time, and then also come back if you guys want to with suggestions, ask each other questions. We're going to open it up at the end. So Ryan and I are going to kick it off with some USDA waiver conversations. So I'm sure it's been all over your emails lately. There's been extensions on waivers that are going to make it a little bit easier for you to operate your meal programs this school year. But some of you may not really understand how the whole process works. So this slide kind of breaks it down very simply. So waivers have been released by the USDA that essentially allows you to deviate from the normal rules due to extenuating circumstances. Your state agency will contact the USDA to opt into those waivers. And once it is granted to a state, they'll inform you, the operators, on how you can participate. And usually what that looks like is an application to ask to have the waiver applied to your school. And you usually have to show why you need it, and also guarantee that you're still going to operate within the spirit and integrity of the school meal programs. So for those of you on here that may have been serving either emergency meals during school closures and then transitioned into serving meals during the summer, you are likely utilizing the seamless summer option or the summer food service program. So for those, you've had these waivers in place, and a lot of those are going to end when you end your summer feeding program. From there, what's going to happen is you'll transition to school meals, okay? So school meals are claimed under different programs, the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program. So Ryan's going to deep dive in the waivers that now apply for when you reopen your schools for instruction, whether that's in-person learning, virtual learning, or a hybrid of both. So go ahead, Ryan, if you want to kick us off.
Great, thank you, Lauren. All right, so the good news is that this week we did receive guidance from the USDA about the new waivers that are coming out. And the waivers that they released are for all of next school year. So we've got some good ideas about what we will be able to do and how you'll be able to operate your programs. Two things that we want to touch on right off the bat about the waivers that you may have been utilizing over the summer that are no longer in place. So while you're doing summer service, you were able to have, we had the area eligibility waiver, which allowed you to serve meals to any students, and they were all claimed, you were all able to count and claim them as free. That is no longer, once you start your regular school year, you will only be able to serve and claim meals to the students that are enrolled at your school, and they will be reimbursed at their eligibility. The second waiver was that parents you didn't need the children to all be in the car when you were having meals picked up by parents. Parents can still, and we'll dive into this a little later, parents are still able to pick up meals for children without them being there, but they will only be able to pick them up for the enrolled students at that school. So let's go, there we go. So here we go. So here is a summary of all of the waivers that have been extended through the end of next school year. And we'll go through them quickly, but you've got your meal pattern flexibility waiver, your non-congregate feeding waiver, your meal service time flexibility, your parent guardian pickup waiver, and the offer versus serve waiver. So let's dive into meal pattern flexibility. All right, so on the graphic to the left there, that is the normal meal pattern you're able to follow. USDA and states are still encouraged to meet this to the greatest extent possible. But the reality is, as we move back into the new school year, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, whether there'll be food shortages, supply chain issues, or things like that. And so this is a waiver that we recommend. This is likely something you'll need to opt into, and we recommend everyone do it just because you don't know exactly what will happen in the future. We want to make sure that even if there are small issues with your supply chain or your vendor, that you're still able to claim those meals. And this waiver will allow you the flexibility that even if you don't meet the meal pattern exactly, as long as you're doing your best to do so, those will be reimbursable meals. All right, so the non-congregate feeding waiver. So this one is the US or your state will give you guidance on whether this will be automatic or if you'll need to opt into it. This is one of the biggest hurdles is making sure that this would be all your kids need to eat in the same location. And so this allows you to serve meals in a non-congregate fashion, meaning so in the classroom, in a grab and go, in a distance learning, so for pickup. You will likely be required to have a plan of how to distribute these. For one big change to note that is different from a summer emergency service model, you will still need to track these meals and use your point of sale system. So no matter what your non-congruent feeding plan is, it needs to incorporate at the very least your point of sale system or a student roster to track the meals you are serving. And linked really closely to that is going to be your meal service time waiver. So in a normal year, there's restrictions on when you can serve breakfast, when lunch can start. This waiver is going to allow for meals to be served outside of those normal windows. The other big thing on this one, this allows you to serve multiple days at a time. So this would allow you to if you wanted to let a student leave for the day and pick up the meals for the next day, or if depending on what your model is, they can pick up multiple days at a time. This is a very important waiver to allow you to do that. The big clarification on this one is you are only allowed to serve on operational days. So if a day is counting towards your overall school year or your ADA, even if students are all virtual, that's an operational day. If you're only running a 4-day week, then and you say your Fridays are just off, they're not school days, you cannot serve meals on non-school days. The other important thing to note, and actually, Lauren, if you could back up real quick, the other important thing to note, this is going to be one of the waivers where you're going to want to have a plan to make sure that you're not that families aren't able to pick up 2 reimbursable meals in one day. So you're going to want to either be able to use your point of sale system and have it mark if a student's already served meals, or if you're using a paper roster, you'll probably want to have some sort of cohort information on there to say, is this student actually in school that day so they can't pick it up through the service line or vice versa. You want to be sure that you don't double serve meals because you will only be able to claim one of them. We move on to the fourth, the parent pickup waiver. Again, this is very similar to the one you are working off of now. However, this only applies to children that are enrolled into the school, but parents or guardians are able to pick up meals on their behalf. This will be one that you will likely need to opt into and have a written plan to ensure that you're able to maintain the accountability of integrity, meaning that, much like with the meal service time waiver, you're not distributing multiple meals to the same student on the same day and double claiming. The other thing to note is that since there is no longer an eligibility waiver or an area eligibility waiver, the meals must be counted and claimed at the child's eligibility level. So, paid students will still be paid for meals that their parents pick up. Finally, we can move on to the offer versus serve waiver. And this really, affects high school because in a normal school year, this would be required that high schools allow students to select, 3 of the 5 items that they want. But for this year, they are now going to allow to waive this requirement. So this means you can do a unitized meal, a pre-plated meal, a pre-bagged meal, to allow for more of a grab and go or delivery to the classroom model where you're not having students form long lines and wait in lines. This will be especially important, to keep distribution moving quickly. I think the last thing to note on the waivers is, so these are the ones that have been released. Now, again, your specific state will give you guidance on both what they've opted into and also what you will need to do if the waivers are not automatically applied to your school. So there will be additional information coming out. The other thing that we anticipate coming down the line is the potable water requirement. We've received a lot of questions about what do we do with our water fountains? Should those be closed off? Are students still allowed to use those? We believe that we will see some flexibility coming out along the requirement of potable water needing to be available a certain distance from the service line. You'll see that coming from the state shortly, as well as guidance around shared tables. At this point, I don't think a shared table is something that most schools will want to do as part of their protocols, and there will be, we expect to see leniency around that as well.
And Ryan, I think Steve, you wanted to just hop on and speak to the meal flexibility waiver in the kind of eyes of a vendor who's providing meals and how that may look for schools that are receiving meals from a vendor.
Definitely. You're able to hear me, correct?
Yep.
All right.
Good.
I'm going to make sure. From the vendor side, the flexibility is a really, really important factor, because if you are setting up grab and go meals, you're going to want to have a little bit of flexibility, especially when you start looking into some of your vegetable components, some of the colors. Some of them may be a little difficult to hit in a unitized grab and go meal, or something that doesn't require 3, 4, 5, 6 packages all together. So definitely look into that side with the meal pattern. Talk to your vendors, find out what their thoughts are with the meal pattern waiver, of how they think it would be best to implement it, what they're looking at for their menu, what's realistically executable for these first few months, hopefully, is all it is. And one of the things that I've talked with a couple of other vendors, and we hope milk doesn't result in short supply again. But if more and more of the schools start going to a serve only type model, and milk is going out to every student, and possibly in bigger numbers than has typically been in the past in your region, we could see some shortages, at least in the supply chain, with some of the vendors having trouble getting enough milk out. We hope that doesn't prove to be true the way it was in March and April. But having these meal pattern waivers already in place, whether you fully use them or not with your vendor, is a good thing. So Ryan's absolutely right as far as take advantage of them, to have them, and then work closely with your vendor and seeing how best to implement them, and still provide those high quality meals for your students, but based on what items can be executed, especially if your schools are used to having a salad bar and you hit all your colors with that before, and that's no longer going to exist.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. And just kind of looking at some of these questions that are coming through as well. One of the big questions is, how do we know if my state specifically has opted into these waivers? So I know that California has already sent out an email to their listserv about waivers that they have opted into and are available. Nevada had a state meeting earlier today, and I see some of our friends from the NDA on here. If you guys have anything you want to chime in and add, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Thanks for joining us. So it really varies state by state. Our assumption is pretty much every state is going to opt into every possible available waiver, but they will be giving you guidance on how you as a school and a program operator can opt in. I know for a fact, if you go on the CDE website and type in COVID-19 waivers, the first thing that pops up is the most recent update, and it shows you what you need to do and what action items. In other instances, we're still waiting to find out like what next steps are as far as opting in and getting those waivers. But just like Ryan said, you want to ideally apply, even if you don't think you need to use it right away. Everything is changing day by day, and you're not, we don't know what it's going to look like a week from now or a month from now. So have them in your back pocket, create a plan for how you're going to execute in compliance as best as possible. And then in the event that you need to utilize the waiver, you have the approval to do so. There was another question specifically about the offer versus serve waiver. So a lot of schools utilize offer versus serve for all grade levels, for breakfast and or lunch. The high school lunch, it is normally required that you must give high school students the option to decline and choose items at lunch. This waiver essentially says it's no longer a requirement, but it's completely up to you. You can continue to do offer versus serve for all of your meals if that's the way you usually executed it and you believe that you can continue to do so with however your meal operations are going to go this year. So hopefully that answers your question. Oh, and thank you, Joe. So Nevada has accepted all 5 of these federal waivers, and program operators, school food authorities, y'all will receive plan templates for utilization of each. Thank you, Joe. Any other questions? Anything else to add, Tess, Steve, Ryan, before we move on? Any more questions before we move on? We're going to talk next about models for executing your meals this year. Are there any waivers on the training hours required? Karen, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that question. Do you want to come off mute and I can, maybe we can figure that out. There you are, Karen, Karen, if you'd like to come off mute, we can.
So
yeah.
in California, we're required to have certain trainings if we're doing meal counts, depending on our role in the meal service. So I'm wondering, since some of these waivers, like one of the trainings is offer versus serve and the meal pattern components, are we also expected to still complete those annual trainings, or has there been any waivers to remove some of those out?
Yeah, that's a really great question. You're referring to professional standards training hours. That makes sense. So yes, you know, there are certain topics that are required to be covered. Usually it's done at the beginning of the school year trainings. You do, if your school is executing offer versus serve, you train on offer versus serve. You know, we support some schools that are only, you know, pre-K through 2nd grade, and they do straight serve for all of their meals. So they don't have to train on offer versus serve prior to the school year because it doesn't apply to them, right? So I think, you know, the best way to answer that question is, as always, civil rights training is required for every single person that touches your meal program. And certainly you're going to want to tailor your trainings this year for your staff based on what models you plan to execute. And certainly if you do just one big training professional development at the beginning of every year, and you want to cover as much as possible just in case you end up having to switch gears throughout, you know, I think it's basically best practice. What do you think you're going to run into in the school year, and make sure that your staff is prepared for that. And let's say you eliminate offer versus serve and later you decide to opt in, you know, you can leave it off your training at the beginning of the year, and then prior to rolling it out again, do a training with your staff. Does that answer your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks so much. Okay, so we did that. David asked if we'll be doing any more additional videos or trainings before August startups. So if, David, I apologize, I'm not sure if you're one of our clients. I don't know all of the people that are at all of our schools, but certainly if you are a client of ours, we do all of our beginning of year trainings. We do our trainings monthly throughout to make sure you check all of those boxes. We've certainly talked about doing additional town hall style trainings. We don't have any dates set at this point in time, but I know Steve and his team also do trainings or conversations from time to time. So if you work with, if Better For You Meals provides your meals, certainly check their email listserv for trainings as well. Additionally, your state agency, the NDA or the CDE, holds trainings from time to time. There's lots of availability out there. So if you need any further resources, David, sure, like shoot us an email at the end of this, and I can send you some links for your particular state or school and give you some resources for that. Okay. Anything else on waivers before we move on to different service models you can execute this year, or any year really? Awesome. Okay. Let's move forward. Okay, so a traditional meal model. While there's not really a traditional meal model, especially in the charter school world, right? Our facilities are usually totally different. You know, you go from one school to the next, and you may, even within a, you know, charter management organization, a district, your schools may have different looking meal programs from site to site, and that's totally okay. What you're doing at school A does not have to be the same at what you're doing at school B. How you execute for breakfast does not have to be the same way that you execute for lunch, okay? You need to figure out what is best for you, your staff, and this school year, and make those decisions based on that. So this is essentially what a traditional meal model looks like. Most kids show up in line in the cafeteria. We all sit together. You're doing offer versus serve for high school. You don't necessarily have to have the meals packaged a certain way. It makes it easier to dispose of trash, right? And so even in executing this model, you may have to take some considerations on how you're going to restructure meals, right? You may have to do smaller groups in the cafeteria, spread people out. These are just some models that we've seen put out there by CMOs and architects and stuff like that. You know, there's lots of things to consider, and we're not saying that there's one cookie cutter thing for you. But today what we're going to try to do is give you a bunch of options and some best practices on how we've guided our school partners to execute, and then take that information and decide what is best for you and your school and your staff. And you may have plan A, and tomorrow you may find out that you have to move to plan B, right? And one more thing I'm going to say, on a call that I was on earlier, the state agency said that they had done a survey of their meal operators and just asking them, you know, has your school finalized their reopening plan? And 50% of them responded to the survey saying, no, we don't have a reopening plan yet. So if you don't have one yet, you're certainly not alone. We're all kind of building the plane while flying it. So again, you know, take as much information as you can in today and through other, you know, resources out there, and have some backup plans, and we'll see how it goes, right? So how this year may look different. So some of these alternative models that we can do are grab and go meals, meals delivered to the classroom, meals grabbed and picked up and taken to the classroom to be eaten. This year, specifically because of the waivers, there can be parent pickups, drive-throughs, and then this year specifically, you can also send home meals because of some of the waivers. So let's break down what some of these look like. So one thing to consider as well, and Steve, you know, feel free to chime in here too, because I know that you've had a lot of conversations with the schools that you provide meals to about these different models. So, you know, staffing is going to have to be a consideration. So maybe you're an independent charter school, and usually there's just one person who kind of makes the whole meal program run. Or maybe you have people in your school that wear multiple hats, and one of their hats is the meal program. You know, keep in consideration when you're choosing what you're going to do and how your meal program is going to look, you may have to bring in other people to help out. And when you have more staff involvement, that usually requires more training. They need to make sure that they understand the program. They need to get civil rights training. If they're handling food, they need to have a food handler certificate, right? Check your state requirements to find out about certain certification programs. I know some of you are on here from the state of Washington, and there's a very specific state one that they require. A lot of our clients, we recommend using ServeSafe because they do online and in-person trainings, and they offer multiple languages. So that's really good. But as far as training goes, Steve, if you just kind of want to talk about like logistics of staffing a little bit.
We'll go through a couple of quick scenarios. So if your school typically uses your own staff for serving, as you come up with your reopening and serving model, work backwards. Think about every possible minute and that's going to be needed, and how many hands are going to be needed. So if you're using a vendor, and when does the food arrive? Typically at what time? And then based on what you want to do with that food from there, are you bagging it to go to individual classrooms? Are you going to have a staging area for kids to grab and go and then be socially distant out in the general area or NPR room? Think about exactly what it is you're going to do and how many minutes is it going to take to prepare that food for distribution. And now we might just be talking breakfast. Then you'll have to do that same exact thing If you're going to be taking it to the classroom, what does that look like? Who's doing that? If it's one person delivering to the classroom, how long do you think it's going to take, and what model, what way are they going to get that food to every single classroom? I mean, think about every single stage of the meal distribution, and assign some time, even if you don't know the exact amount, but you may realize you have this amazing plan on paper and then realize it's going to take one person 6 hours to give out lunch. Just so really think about every stage, who's involved. You may realize you can't use one person anymore and may require 2 or 3. And same thing with if you're using your vendor staff. It's one, if your vendor, generally those people somebody's paying their wages. So if you're going to engage your vendor to have their staff do all of that sorting, do distribution, is it going to be within the same amount of time frame that their staff would typically work at your school, or is that going to require more hours? If it's going to require more hours, you need to have those conversations now with your vendor and think about what is that going to cost? Because definitely, I mean, if your meal volumes go up or down, they go up, maybe your vendors can eat the cost of those additional hours. If they can and your numbers are going to go down, that could affect them negatively. And so it has to all obviously fit within your budget, but the same thing has to apply to your vendor. It's got to be able to fit within theirs too, so that they can actually provide you the service that you need. So really think about every single stage. And also we'll probably dive into soon is the equipment that those people are going to need. And what does that equipment look like? What does it cost? And how long does it take to get? So definitely just dig in and think about every single minute that it's going to require to roll it out.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. So, and I kind of transitioned to this fake school plan, right? So this isn't a school plan that has been given to us, but based on conversations that we've had with our clients, trying to help them navigate and make decisions about what's going to be best for them, here's a potential scenario, right? So it's possible that your school has just like 50% of families have opted. I don't feel comfortable sending my child to school, so they're going to learn from home, at least for the beginning of this year, right? So maybe 50% of your school will not be showing up in person. So you may choose to have daily walk up or drive through options for the family or the student to collect their meals for the day, right? But for the 50% of families that are sending their children to school, maybe you're doing an every other day model, right? So if you're doing an every other day model, you may have meals in person one day, and then for their off day, you send that meal home with them, right? So in thinking about all that, just kind of like Steve was doing, so I'm looking at this plan and I'm thinking, okay, so meals are being delivered to the classroom. So possibly the afternoons before, if it's shelf-stable breakfast, you can pre-bag a bunch of items ahead of time, add the milks in the morning and deliver them to the classroom. So you need bodies to do that, right? Grab and go lunch usually requires less people maybe. So everything's prepared ahead of time, and you just need a couple of kiosks or the people in your cafeteria windows that would normally, staff the point of sale, check kids off as they come through, scan them in the POS, whatever it is. So this is just kind of an example of a plan that could be fleshed out. And also noticing this school can serve and claim meals on Friday because they're not off, they're conducting virtual learning. So it is a day that is counted in their calendar year. Even though there aren't any students on campus that day, it is still a day that they can serve meals and claim meals. Okay, so let's first talk about kind of what grab and go meals looks like. So here's just a bulleted outline. I'm not going to read this word for you, but the general gist of it is you have a central location or multiple ancillary locations where you have your meal service completely set up, and there is a point of sale station there. And you have one, maybe 2 people staffing it, and that person makes sure that students are getting their meals, that they're only taking one, they're bringing it from there to maybe their classroom, or maybe you're having an open air lunch and you've got a big outside campus space and students have been instructed to spread out and choose a place to eat your lunch that way. Of course you need to think about trash and, guiding our students and training them to also know, okay, this is different this year, but here are the expectations of me on how I get my meals and how I dispose of them and what I can and can't. Can I bring them with me? Can I not bring them with me? But just know that you want to make sure that you have a way to ensure that students aren't picking up a meal in the cafeteria and then popping it in their backpack and then going around and getting a second lunch maybe in front of the gym if that's where your second location is. And that's why it's super important to utilize point of sale systems. Almost all of them, I can't think of one that doesn't, has a built-in red flag that goes up. So if a child tries to go to different stations and take more than one meal, big red screen's gonna pop up and say, this is a duplicate meal. And that'll stop and prevent you from counting or claiming that meal a second time. So you want to make sure that wherever the student is getting the meal, that's where the point of sale happens. That's where they are counted. And that's a little bit easier for grab and go meals. I've got a couple of examples of our school. So this is a grab and go station where they've picked up their breakfast. They have their choice of 1% milk or fat-free milk, and then they enter their information to be counted. Now, let me say, most of our photos and videos in today's session are from last school year or previous school year. So things are a little bit different for you this school year, and instead of doing something like every single student touching the keypad, you may want to instead transition to using scan cards, where your cafeteria staff have their handheld scanner or the scanner gun, and every single child has their either phone barcode or their piece of paper barcode, or their ID card might have their barcode from the point of sale, and they identify that way, and it's hands-free and touch-free. Okay, any questions on grab and go meals? Okay, let's move on. Okay, so meals in the classroom. So there's different ways that this can happen. One way that I've seen done is if you have one staff member in like a giant rolling cart of meals with a computer, that person is in charge of taking a hallway, and they go classroom by classroom. Students come, take a meal, and sit back down. That's one way that it's been done. Another way that it's been done is pre-packing meals into cooler bags or containers to maintain safe temperatures. And then from there, teachers or staff in the classroom are in charge of distribution. So they ensure that as soon as a child takes a meal, they are counted at the point of sale as taking that meal, and then they sit down. And all of those students are claimed at either the free, reduced, or paid rate. So it's very important that you're still utilizing your computer point of sale system or some sort of point of sale system. Again, that may mean if you do this and your staff in the classrooms are required to do this, they also need some training hours to ensure that they're executing the meal program correctly and they know how to count and claim. One thing that we like to highlight is depending on how you do meals in the classroom, you can count some of that as academic minutes in conjunction. Certain states certainly make sure that you know your state's meal consumption times. Nevada, for example, has regulations where you have a minimum amount of minutes that students are allowed to consume meals. So when you're building out your schedule, whether it's consumption time in the classroom or consumption time somewhere else, if your state has minimums to meet, you want to make sure that you're taking that into account so that the last child that receives their meal in the lunch line has that minimum amount of time for consumption. Here's just a brief example of what some of the meals in the classroom look like. So, you know, meals in the classroom also tend to significantly increase participation in meals. When more kids are eating, it's easier for kids to learn, it's easier for kids to stay awake, to participate. So there's certainly benefits to doing meals in the classroom. Steve, do you want to talk about some of the solutions that you are working on and guiding for your meal clients?
Sure. I mean, one of the things we're preparing for is a shortage of equipment. We are talking with various vendors for some of the typical bags. Obviously, Sterno has acquired one of the companies that produces those red, oftentimes they're red, blue, or black insulated bags, those square ones that you see on the screen with the little carts, and they have a bungee strap or so. Some of those are carrying around a 6 to 10 week lead time right now because districts are also buying them. Everyone's planning to do some sort of preparation or need to serve in the classroom, or at least to a different area than the norm. So these vendors are getting a lot of orders right now. They're very, very busy. So one of the things we're also looking at is what could be quicker turnkey solutions. What are things that are more readily available, non-typical, just the school insulated bag? What carts are available? So like that green cart there, green and gray cart, is something that's usually pretty available through Home Depot or Amazon. It's made by Costco, not the store Costco, but COSCO. It's about 50, 60 bucks, and you can fit about 3 of those large, I think they're about 24-inch Cambros, are a little, like that's the small version in the picture there. So it'd be about double that size. So that could fit 2 of those or one of the big ones, and then even stack about 3 high pretty securely if you're taking it around, dropping off to classrooms. But then even with those smaller ones, if you're thinking you're only going to have about 15 kids per classroom, that's not a lot of items. That little Cambro, soft Cambro there weighs probably about 6 ounces total weight. I'm just shooting from the hip. It's about 14 by 22. That one is a little bit of the bigger one there, the measurements that are there. The smaller one is about 14 by 13. And you can fit about 40 milks in there. So if you're thinking you only need about 15 or so, maybe 2 of those per classroom, you've got your milk, your meal. Even if you're doing a hot meal, you could put 1 for hot and 1 for cold. You could fit 15 milks and 15 fruit in there pretty easily and leave 2 of those at every single one of your doors throughout your school. Now you're looking at probably about $100 per class solution. Still not cheap, but those other bags with the cart are probably looking at about $160 to $200 per classroom. So just depending on what your needs are and then the time frame, those smaller black Cambros could be accessible a little easier. They're not typically used in the schools. They're more for catering, but they actually hold temp a heck of a lot better than some of those insulated bags. So we're looking at all kinds of different equipment that's not normal, maybe a little less expensive, but still as durable and as value added as anything that you would see at any of the school food shows or the conferences each year.
Awesome.
See here on the chat.
And the good thing is about this, don't consider it like a one-time investment. These are great if you want to continue breakfast in the classroom later, or they're awesome for when we get to go back to field trips, right? You can use them for field trip meals later. So certainly, it's not going to be a one and done sort of thing with this type of equipment. Okay. Drive-through and parent pickup. Ryan, can I put you on the spot? Do you want to talk about this since you already kind of got it started with the waivers?
Sure. So for schools that are not doing in-person instruction or doing some sort of hybrid program, you can still do, or assume you opt into the waiver, you'll have the option for families or for enrolled students to do pickup. This is great just because obviously people need to eat every day. So if you're only doing actual on-campus instruction, two days a week, even 0 days a week, still lets you, for every operational day of school, you're able to distribute meals. You can also, if you're doing completely virtual, you can also do multiple days worth with the meal serving time waiver. You can do multiple days of meals at once. So I think that's really great to both limit the amount of exposure your staff has and also the amount of time parents need to come to actually pick up the meals. The most important thing on this one is to remember that you can still only give out one breakfast and one lunch for each operational day of school. Over the summer, you were allowed to do weekend service. You're not allowed to do 7-day-a-week meal service. This again is only for enrolled children. So if there's 4 siblings, but only 2 go to the school, only the 2 enrolled students will be able to pick up those meals. All right, and then so for multiple meals, so again, this would be and I think this is something to talk to your vendor about, to really figure out what options they have. And I think that might also help you tailor what your plan will be. Some vendors are able to do maybe like a 5-day meal kit. So that could be something you could distribute on a Monday. It would have 5 breakfasts, 5 lunches in there. And then the student would have meals for the week. Some schools can choose to have a couple of day delivery through drive-through. So again, this would be either you'd link it up with your schedule, or you could do something where it's just Monday you can pick up 2 meals, Wednesday you pick up 3 meals for the rest of the week, something like that. But again, you need to make sure that they're only receiving 1 per day. And also, this is very different from what we did over the summer, where it was able to be picked up at no cost. This, you would need to be able to track the meals by eligibility, and they would be reimbursed as such. Finally, and this is sort of a general message, but messaging for your program, and just messaging in general. Obviously, we know we're going to need to be flexible this school year, and your communication is going to need to be timely to parents. So if the teams that are working in the kitchens may not be the same teams that are able to use the school messenger or PowerSchool systems, so develop your plans now. So if there's going to be delays or changes or emergency closures or modifications to the pickup or the time schedules, make sure your staff knows how to communicate with their parents, their families, their students.
Cool. So before we move on to vendor support, just a reminder, thank you all for using the Q&A, the question and answer section. Tess, thank you so much for jumping in and answering a lot of these questions. In case you haven't had a chance to look at it, you might want to pop in there, check out some of the questions that have been answered. It may be something that comes up for you as well. And also we'll come back and address any of these live. One of the questions that was answered that is actually going to be state dependent. Someone asked if we were serving breakfast in previous years, do we have to continue serving breakfast for the upcoming school year? So again, this is going to vary state by state, and it's also going to vary as to whether you are a provision program or not. So if you're a CEP school, you have to serve breakfast and lunch if you do community eligibility provision. If you are in the state of Nevada and you have a high free and reduced rate, you actually have to serve breakfast after the bell in a typical school year. But I believe this school year with the mealtime flexibility waiver, you have to provide breakfast. It can just be at different times. So again, that's going to vary by state and by your circumstance. So just make sure that you're following state guidance, or if you're one of our clients, certainly reach out to Ryan if he's your client manager, or one of us, and we'll talk through what you do have to do or what you don't have to do, or what we don't know yet. Okay, so let's transition into vendor support. Steve, who is representing vendors on this call, is going to do a lot of the talking here. And basically what we're going to cover is, even if you're still trying to figure out your meal operations or your school reopening operations in general, the sooner you're having conversations with your vendor, the better. Provide as much information to them as possible in advance. So that way they can say, yeah, we can accommodate this, we can do this, or, you know, we can't do this, right? So it's imperative that sooner rather than later, you're at least starting the channel of communication between you and your vendor. Steve.
Sorry, I was on mute there. I had to take it off. Yeah, so these are some of the questions that we throw out to our schools right now and have been throwing out, and we're hoping to even get more of this information as we in the coming week or two, so we can make our preparations, because a lot of schools are starting in around the week of August 10th, and that's going to come very quick. We're only 40 days away from that. And so we're always asking, how do you anticipate your school day to look like? One of the things that is occurring a lot of is the school's instructional team is not talking to the meal team. And so they're making plans for when the schools, when the kids may or may not be there, but then the actual execution of what the meal portion is going to look like isn't necessarily being conveyed, and there's not really necessarily a collaborative approach. So definitely, if you're representing the meal side, let them know that your vendor needs information, and the more you can share with them about this, the more they can share, respond to you, and kind of give you an idea whether the path you and your team are heading down is even feasible for them. One thing to know, all your vendors, doesn't matter who they are, even oftentimes if they're the district, they want to serve you food. They want to serve your kids, and they want to serve as many kids as possible. So if you hear we can't do that, or even a no from your vendor, trust that that is not them just drawing a hard line because they don't want to. It means they've thought it out. They've tried to figure out how they can do it and execute it. They don't want to tell you no. They want to serve you as many meals as possible. So if you're hearing that, definitely take it into account that this is something maybe if there's changes and you're open to ideas and brainstorming with them, take advantage of that. So the more you know, again, when your kids are going to be there, how many kids do you expect to be there per day? And depending on what your style is, if some of the schools are now exploring going the CEP or Provision 2 route to try and serve all kids free if possible. If you're going to exploring that route, or you already have that in place, then okay, it's going to make your life a little easier, because if you've got 100 kids per day on campus, then the likelihood you could realistically give out 100 meals per day, to every kid, and possibly with the breakfast or a meal to take home for the next day, if say for breakfast. And then think about if your kids are only going to be there a couple days a week, and you want meals for the next day. If you've got a Monday, Wednesday student or a Tuesday, Thursday student, and you want a meal for them to take home on their off day, your vendor has to be prepared for that, because now they need to send you possibly a hot meal or a cold meal to eat on site, and then one to take home that needs to stay at temperature and be able to stay cold enough for them to take home and likely heat at home. So all of that information, definitely you've got to share, because your vendor has to think about what is the logistics. Most of your vendors do not have a freezer full of lean cuisine style meals just waiting that they can just go pick from inventory and deliver to you. If your vendor's anything like us, we're making that food oftentimes the day before, sometimes midnight that morning of. And so that food is being made and going directly to you. And so we have to have ample time to be able to sort it, make sure we're sending the right meals out so that your kid isn't leaving with 2 of the same meal. And so as much as you can supply your vendor with early, definitely take it on right now. And then also start looking at alternative ways on campus. Maybe you've never heated on site, or you've never stored anything on site. You don't have room for an oven, but you could have room for refrigerators. Perhaps your vendor could supply you with a refrigerator for rent or for borrow, or to purchase your own. And that would allow you to be able to house a few more items or so for a longer period of time on your campus, to help in the distributing to your kids. And you can take in, again, as it says there, take in more food. Because if you've got 100 meals that are going to be eaten on site, but 100 are going to go home, your vendor has to work with you in keeping those meals cold, depending on what time they're going to arrive at your school, and what time those kids are actually going to physically take it to take home. And so that's the other part, is if they're taking food home, when and where is that being given out to them? Is it at the exit? Is it in their classroom as they're leaving the classroom? A lot of those concepts have to be ironed out. And the earlier that you brainstorm with your vendor, the better the realistic solutions that you can come up with. And so refrigerators are probably one of the easier things to acquire, commercial fridges, more so than warmers or ovens even, very much so. And so if you're able to store colder food, and that's one of the things also, if your kids are looking at, say, 2 days a week or so, I know a lot of students are used to hot lunches. That's pretty much the majority of what we serve. Probably about 75%, 80% of all meals we serve typically daily were hot meals, whether they were heated on site at the school or we delivered them hot. One of the things to consider is possibly exploring how many more cold options, not so much shelf stable, but cold sandwiches, wraps, maybe salads or something like that, for the kids to be eaten on site. I always hear, well, no, the kids want the hot meals and they're only going to eat the hot meals. Funny thing is, my own 10-year-old, I'm a food vendor. My own 10-year-old only gets pretty much a cold sandwich daily. Maybe one day he buys from lunch, but he's used to getting a cold sandwich. And most kids, I know, I grew up on it. And so we are looking at exploring options first with many schools, is if their kids are there 2 days a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and they need also a take-home meal for Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, we're looking at a cold meal delivery, sandwich. We have a big variety of sandwiches that the kids could have for that day. And then the meal that they would take home would be a meal to be heated at home. So a fully cooked meal, but it's a hot meal, but that's what they can take home, because now it's making it a little bit easier for your staff or any staff on site, whoever's, if you're doing classroom lunch, if your vendor's delivering hot food to you or you're pulling it out of the oven at your school, now you have to put it in hot food in additional containers, get it to those classrooms, and now your teachers or whomever's giving out that hot food, there's just a lot of touching of that hot food and the temperature. You're trying to maintain, you're keeping proper temp. You're trying to make sure nobody's getting burned. Whereas if you've got 15, 20 sandwiches going to the classroom, they can be easily given out. And then the meals to be taken home are also still cold, but to be heated. So you're still getting that hot dish. And so it just provides you a little bit more flexibility. And one of the things to try and tell parents is, this is all what we're trying to do for the time being. We're all trying to come up with solutions that are realistic and executable. And that's the big part, is whatever you commit to on day one, you don't want to have to change after a few weeks, realizing it's just this plan isn't working. And your vendors feel the same way. Anything that we commit to you, we want to make sure that we can actually execute for as long as this time frame takes, whether it's a month, 2 months, hopefully no more than that, 3 months. And then we all want to get back to normal food service. And so convey that to your students and to your parents, that what you're looking for is short-term executable options that will give your students quality, but at the same time, really, really dovetail and blend in with what you're trying to execute as a school, and make sure that there's still time enough for instruction and you're not just focusing around food for more hours in the day than is needed.
Awesome.
So some of the questions.
Yeah, just to, and And
And
Lisai Anderson, I see that we've got a question from you, so I'm gonna allow you to talk if you want to get ready by taking yourself off mute. But real quick, just kind of touching upon these next two slides, just basically talk about things you may want to ask your vendor, but also knowing before you ask these questions, like if you're going to come to them with questions, a lot of their responses are going to be like additional questions. So you want to make sure if you don't have, I don't know if you're on this call and you don't have a vendor solidified yet for next year, you certainly want to make sure you're finding out what, your local vendor capacity is, and knowing, and we can touch upon this in more depth towards the end, but there's also a waiver out there that allows you to enter into a temporary 1-year contract for essentially like emergency procurement. Just knowing if you do that, if you switch a vendor or get a new vendor for just this 1 year, you will have to do competitive procurement next year. Especially if you're over that small purchase threshold, you'll need to run an RFP. So just taking a look at these are questions that you may want to ask, but make sure you're coming to them with information to supply as well. And then other questions you may want to ask your vendor. So Steve is with Better For You Meals, and he's a great partner and is awesome and treats his schools really well. There's dozens and dozens of vendors in California and Nevada. Our schools use all different vendors. And so these are some of the questions that we are guiding our school clients to make sure they're having the conversations. You may want prepackaged fruit and vegetables this year. It may not be something you usually get. Some vendors just give you individualized forks, knives, spoons. You may want prepackaged this year. So that way there's no possible like cross-contamination of people grabbing from the forks and spoons. You may have only done lunch in the past and you want to expand your options. If you can get approved by the state to do additional meals, that's more touch points for your families that may be in unusual circumstances and struggling right now. All of these things, are there different components that are shelf stable? And one of the other things is, that's not on here is, and Steve, you just prompted me that this is a good question. You as my vendor, like, what are you doing to innovate? Like, what are you doing to think outside the box and help us, navigate? Maybe it's certain menu items that you haven't seen before that are going to be easier for families to heat at home. Find out what legwork your vendor's kind of doing to Steve is seeking out, bulk purchases of this equipment that he knows is going to run out. Like, is your vendor taking care of you, right? So make sure if you haven't been in communication that you want to get in communication with them sooner rather than later. Okay. One of the questions, who is going to provide the bags for grab and go? So maybe you usually don't get grab and go. Your vendor may say, hey, like, it's an additional cost, but we can get it at a much better cost than you can order it on Amazon. So maybe they'll be willing to turnkey that discount that they usually get for giant bulk orders for something like that to you. So that's something that you can ask them as well. Any other questions? We're very much on time. I'm excited. Any other questions about vendors, managing your relationship with your vendor, questions you should ask your vendor, food right now? Cool.
All right, Lauren, just to throw in, just to circle back to that bag question.
Yeah.
Most of us vendors, we're not in the business of selling additional stuff like bags. There's no margin on it. We buy it, and for many schools, we were just giving them out because it was replacing possibly the tray that they would normally need. And so the the difference was negligible. So we said, all right, we'll send you bags in lieu of the tray, no additional cost. But if as a school you needed both, a vendor like us, we would just say, this is what we get it for. We'll add it to your invoice. We're not trying to make more money off of bags because there's no money really to be made in it. So really ask your vendors what their options are, what they can do if you are replacing some equipment or items that you don't need anymore because of the way you're giving out. see if they're willing to supply you with the bags in lieu of. So definitely have those conversations, be open with them and see what they're willing to do.
Awesome. Thanks so much for giving us the big rundown, Steve. That was really helpful. Okay, so the last thing that I'm going to talk about is eligibility options. And the reason we wanted to touch upon this specifically is obviously, you know, there's a lot changing for the national economic landscape as well as possibly your school families. So, you know, you may have followed a traditional free and reduced lunch application model. You sent them out to families, they sent them back, you processed them, kids were free, that were free, reduced, they were reduced, paid, they were paid. And, you know, you may not have needed to do much legwork or reconsideration of that, right? So first of all, I want to say it's July 1. So it is officially the green light to send your free and reduced lunch applications home. A few caveats, you know, that we tell our clients that we work with. If your POS system is not rolled over, if your student information system is not rolled over, you're going to create a mess for yourself in trying to process those applications if you send them out and your systems are not ready to accept them, right? So that's item number one. But if you are not utilizing online applications and your point of sale system has it available, this is the year. Now keep in mind, you know, these developers of these point of sale systems are inundated with requests. So get your request in as soon as possible. It usually takes, in our experience, the, you know, POS systems that our schools use, it usually takes 4 weeks for them to build out an online platform for you. Not all POS systems can just click and turn it on. It doesn't, it's just, the coding doesn't work that way necessarily, especially when they have to make sure your specific platform is built into their general application. One of the reasons why we love online applications for our schools and their families is the paper form can be difficult to understand and difficult to fill out and result in a lot of errors. Online application systems almost always have stopgaps after each question. So you can see them in red text on here. You cannot move on to the next section of the application until you have answered the previous information correctly first. The other really great thing about online application platforms is it's not just necessarily a bunch of grids to fill in with instructions like the paper app is. A lot of systems have reconfigured it so it's basically a question and answer format. So it's easier to understand. They also have translations in different languages. So they're essentially asking you a question, you're responding with the answer, and then they input it into the form format. So online applications are unbelievable. We love them, you'll love them, and people are gonna use them more than ever this year. So trust me, this is the year to roll it out. Other things that you may want to think out if you do traditional like free and reduced lunch applications. We've been talking to some of our schools that, you know, once they get the big chunk of apps in and they're still waiting to hear back from some families, you know, maybe there's barriers to getting them to you. Maybe they can't physically get to your school site, you know, especially if your office isn't open 5 days a week, right? Or during the school year. Send pre-addressed stamped envelopes in with your application. If you know that family needs it and can get to it, like make it more accessible so that your families can access the free meals or reduced price meals that you have. So in addition to this, in talking about collecting as many applications as possible, I want to talk about 2 different provision programs today. I'm going to start with provision 2 because it's related to free and reduced lunch applications. So essentially the provision 2 program is a way to serve meals to all of your families, or excuse me, all of your enrolled students for free. And it eliminates the burden of paperwork in a 4-year cycle. So what you would do this year is you would send out free and reduced lunch applications as you normally do, and collect them and encourage families to apply. Because what you're essentially doing is you're establishing a base year. And I'll go into the details of a base year. But the benefits of provision 2 is not only that you're reducing the administrative burden and only dealing with applications once every 4 years, but your meal lines will move faster. There's less contact needed between pin pads or barcodes or writing students' names down. All students will be eating for free. Your participation will likely go up because the stigma of being a free student versus a reduced student versus a paid student that opts into meals, you know, it's less obvious to who is eating every single day because most kids are going to eat every single day because it's free, right? Also, you know, paid families often would opt into school meals just to eliminate the burden of having to make a lunch every single day, even if they don't need it. And those families can participate at no cost as well. It also eliminates the need for balance letters, collecting unpaid meals, rolling, you know, your general fund subsidizing meal debt. So how does this work? So I said you establish a base year. So essentially this school year would be your base year. You send out your applications now or in a few weeks, just like you normally would. You collect them, you process them. For our clients that are on the line, this is, you know, we would handle all of your application processing, you know, like we normally do and work with your determining official to give the thumbs up and say, yep, these are good, these are good, these are good. So that would still be the case. You'd still pull and match your direct certification lists like we do. And we would check that with your determining official to make sure that all is good. So you'd still be conducting your eligibility matches via direct certification as well as your free and reduced lunch applications as normal, right? And you certainly want to push as many people as possible to turn them in. Remember, you cannot require all families to fill out an application. You cannot require it, but you can strongly encourage it because not only is it going to help your families, but in a lot of states, it helps your school. You know, your per pupil funding may be based on your eligibility level of your school. Grants, you may become, you know, eligible for more grant funding for your school based on your free reduced percentage. So use that messaging for families too. Maybe you don't usually apply, maybe you don't plan on getting meals, but if you fill out this application, you may qualify and that could help us, your school that's trying to help you. The other thing that's unique about provision 2 is it gives you an additional month of leeway to essentially collect additional applications. So instead of straight going to all meals free, your first claiming month, so let's say that's August, you can still collect from paid families in August before going to all free. And so once you've established your base year, every single month is going to have its own percentage, right? So here's an example at the top. So in this particular month, they served 400 free meals, 75 reduced price meals, and 25 paid meals out of 500. So their percentages for their claim is they're going to get reimbursed at the free rate for 80% of the meals. They're going to get reimbursed at the reduced rate for 15% of the meals, and they're going to get reimbursed for the paid rate at 5% of their meals. So the key here is, since you are not collecting money from families, your general fund needs to subsidize the difference. So whatever you collect from your reimbursement, right? Whatever your reimbursement is, the difference between your invoice and your reimbursement needs to be paid by general fund. You cannot use your school lunch program account money to make up the difference. So that's where this is like the catch and go of, okay, I can't collect money from families to help pay for invoices, and I can't use my National School Lunch Program federal funds. So how do I balance this out? And you may find that between the administrative burden of applications, balance letters, all of that, that it's worth it for you to transition to provision 2 and just say, nope, I'm not collecting money. We're not dealing with this, but we're going to establish our base year this year. And then in the following years, you can see in this bottom right-hand corner, once you've established your percentage for each month, and it may fluctuate depending on what students are enrolled or, additional direct certification matches, your claims, January of this year, January of next year, January of the year after that, are all based on this initial base year. And it's all based on the initial eligibility that you collect. And so the benefit of doing it this year as opposed to other years, as I said, your families may be in different circumstances. You may have a higher free and reduced rate of families, of students, than you've had in the past. So this may be a good year to establish a base year and keep those percentages for the next 4 years. Cool. I'm going to go to CEP. Hey, India, I'm going to have Ryan answer your question directly on your next call together, because it's really going to be, there is an ideal number for CEP, which we're going to get to, but it's really school dependent for Provision 2 and what your kind of general finances look like. So you and Ryan should connect for your next client call, and we can help you figure out if it's a good choice for Golden Oak. Okay. All right. CEP. Okay, so this is one that's more well known and you've probably heard of. So CEP is community eligibility provision. A lot of the benefits are exactly the same. The main difference, I should say, is two things. One, you don't do any applications, not even this year. Okay, free and reduced applications are gone for the cycle, for the 4-year cycle. Difference number 2 is it's only based on your direct certification numbers. So if you have a high-ish percentage of direct certification students, and I'll tell you, our eligibility director on our team has said that she's seen numbers go up just in April, May, June, the counts are going up. So you may not even be aware of it. When we do direct cert matches for our clients every single month, we've seen these numbers go up. So you may be in a different circumstance that you've never been in before. Your numbers may be much higher. So how does that work? So you want to establish your identified student percentage, your ISP. The people that are counted in your ISP, as I said, are students that are directly certified. So that's the students that receive food stamps, work assistance. It's called different things in different states. So Washington is basic food. California, it's Cal Fresh, Cal Works. So in California, you find all that information in Cal Pads. So you want to make sure you're finding all possible matches. So not only, the students that are on the list for Cal Fresh or SNAP, but their siblings that may go to your school too also, that may not be on the list. So you want to find as many possible students to count in your identified student percentage, okay? Your number needs to be at least 40% to even apply. You cannot be a CEP school if you are under 40%. The ideal number for CEP does exist. That magic number is 62.5%. And here's why. So you figure out your CEP claiming rate based on your ISP multiplied by the USDA multiplier, which is 1.6. So if you just barely make that threshold and you have 40% of your students on direct certification, you're going to multiply that number by 1.6. And that gets you to a free claiming rate of 64%. So there is no reduced in CEP. So 64% of your meals will be counted and claimed at the free reimbursement rate. 36% of your meals will be claimed at the paid reimbursement rate. Again, whatever the difference is between your reimbursement and your invoice needs to be made up by your general fund, because you cannot pay for the difference under your general fund. So, essentially, to round numbers, when you're looking at this, you need to figure out if your general fund can essentially subsidize 36% of your invoice, right? The reason we say 62.5 is the magic number is because when you hit that number, every single meal that you serve in your building is going to be reimbursed at the free rate. Okay, so it doesn't matter what child takes the meal and eats it. It doesn't matter what their individual circumstances. Your school as a whole is CEP with 100% free claiming, and every single meal is reimbursed at the free rate. Often this means that schools, can completely break even or even, acquire a bit of profit in their account that they can use to pay for staffing or other supplies related directly to their meal program. So CEP could be a really great option for you this year if you're noticing that more families are opting into assistance programs and getting things like food stamps, work assistance. Again, there's lots of ways to be directly certified. If the family is considered homeless by McKinney-Vento, they're doubled up. Migrant education programs count tons and tons of things. So one of the questions this year is how do you opt into these programs? So typically a lot of states have a deadline of June 30th. They have pretty much all been extended through the end of summer. Again, it varies state by state. So they are giving you extra time to find more matches. And this is based off of the students, whoever was enrolled at your school as of April 1. Tess, and chime in here if you want to come off mute. I just want to make sure that I'm explaining this correctly for this particular school year. So the roster as of April 1st is compared against who from that roster is directly certified. So even if a child was not receiving food stamps on April 1st, but on June 15th, they show up on your list, you get to count them, okay?
So that's not 100%. So I believe that it is still April 1. As far as who's on your roster, Joe might want to chime in as far as what Nevada is setting. It is, if you can count your DC list is June. I'm not 100% certain that that's across all states, Lauren.
Okay, so regardless,
the
benefits of opting in this year are that your CEP direct certification numbers are likely higher than they've been in previous years. And certainly on a case-by-case basis, if you want to look at this together, reach out to your client manager. If you're a school that doesn't currently partner with us, shoot us an email. We'll direct you on where you can find the information or who at your state you can call to dig deeper into it. So again, it's a little bit of a wonky year. For the most part, states are opting into the same deadlines, but there is some fluctuation. But we'll certainly do our best to help you navigate wherever you are and whatever program you're trying to opt into. Thanks, Tess.
Yes, definitely. And thanks, Lauren. I know that we wanted to touch on eligibility because as we discuss different service models, those become complex when we start thinking about collecting money from paid or reduced students. And so we did want to make sure that we touched on CEP in provision 2 and encourage schools to look into those options, especially for the upcoming school years, so that those can kind of alleviate, like Lauren was saying, the burden of collecting monies, especially if you're trying to do meals in the classroom or parent pickup and drive through any of the alternative meal models.